Welcome to ourspirit.com's presentation called The Quest for Spiritual Pathways. As a beginning overview of what we're doing, I'd like to say that this is the second set of lectures that we've done, and the first set was called The New World Awakening. They were very popular, and many people asked us to do another one. But this time, our producers and directors at ourspirit.com said we really needed to take it much further. We needed not to just show what we did in New World Awakening, that we all live in an apocalyptic age, that we are all challenged to have our own revelation, and that we are all facing multiple beasts and dragons that are described in beautiful terms in St. John's Apocalypse. But what we need to do today is to speak about some pathways to the Spirit. And to do so, we need to find that there are pathways for every individual. And so that's why we have a quest, and it's an individual quest. So in this new series of lectures, we're going to be addressing a number of ways to get to the spiritual world. Now, for those of you on some of our blogs who might not understand some of these terms, I'm going to try to explain them in terms that you would understand, that would get rid of the jargon. But what we need to do is make sure that we also give you the tools so that you can develop a cosmology to understand who you are, and where you're going. And if you don't know that, then what is called in Christian Western esotericism, the mysteries of birth and death, will elude you. So what I'm going to try to explain in this talk is a topic that is so important. It's so imperative. And in fact, it's a battle that we're all involved in, whether we know it or not. And the more we wish to ignore the battle, the further we take losses. And so tonight's talk is on transhumanism. And as the flyer says in the advertisement, we're going to be speaking about 5G, fifth generation technology. We're going to be speaking about also a being called Ahriman. And that's going to take a bit of explanation. But if we cannot really reach further than science, secular humanism science, by the way, into the beingness behind things, then we will never understand their origin. We cannot understand what they're doing to us now, and there is no way that we can prepare for what is coming in the future. And as you know, I could go into a long list, and I will in a bit, to overwhelm you with the type of things that are going on in life in terms of technology. And the rush towards transhumanism, it's being led by the corporations who are making the machines for transhumanism. So the concept of bringing any morality or wisdom into the discussion of transhumanism shocked me when I saw in 2018 a number of books come out by people who are students of Rudolf Steiner's teachings, and they tried in a very real way to grapple with this issue. And that's why we're going to talk about it as the first issue on the quest for spiritual pathways. And you might not think transhumanism is a spiritual pathway, but I'm going to make that distinction in just a minute. The further talks in this series will be on the being of Anthroposophia, the science of the Holy Grail, the seven ethers and a theory of everything that's connected to them, the etherization of the blood, and the eternal curriculum. So these talks will come with a great deal of research, and just as we have already told you in the past, if you look for the notes underneath this video, you will find not only the complete presentation that I'm giving now, but also some other things that will help, and many, many URL links to previous reports that we have made, intelligence reports, as well as connecting to what it is that we've done with our previous series. So those are the initial remarks that I'd like to make. When I started thinking about transhumanism, the very first thing that came to mind was a quote from Ephesians 6:11 and 12. I'd like to share that with you. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. I think many who follow the teachings of Rudolf Steiner would say that they would have to agree with that, they would also know what some of these words mean. When we refer to principalities, or we refer to powers, or we refer to the rulers of darkness, you're actually referring to specific Christian hierarchical beings. And we're going to get into a deeper discussion of that in just a little while. But it is imperative, as I said earlier, that if you do not know the beings that are behind these machinations, that Rudolf Steiner said will be with us until the end of earth incarnation, the end of the earth. From now till then, the number one question is, what will humans do with machines? And what will machines do with humans? And in my opinion, because I've named it such, and to point out the way that I feel about this, I believe this is a battle between human intelligence versus artificial intelligence. And I'd like to make the case that human intelligence should always be primary, and that unfortunately, there are beings who are good and beings who slow down in their evolution. Sometimes they even stop. Sometimes they even go backwards. And those beings are working now, not even in this realm that we would call the realm of nature, but in the realm of subnature, to really capture and allure people into a realm that we will also be discussing much further, called the eighth sphere, or what you could call another moon of the earth, where the unredeemed aspects that can't go on with progressive evolution will find a home in the future. And so what I'm about to say is terrifying, but so is our times. And Rudolf Steiner, in The Challenge of the Times, gives us ideas on how it is that we can work through these things. He also tells us that this battle is waged in three different ways. In the East, it's waged through something he calls eugenic occultism. When Rudolf Steiner refers to eugenic occultism, occultism means that which is hidden, but needs to come to light in the future. It doesn't mean anything negative or anything to do with magic or any such nonsense. So in the East, you have eugenic occultism. In Europe, in the middle, you have hygienic occultism, which can bring forth the forces of healing. And eugenics is, of course, very key to the mysteries of birth and death. And so the caste systems of the East, these are the systems that need to be rethought. These are the things that in our time must be taken up by people in the East. And if you look at what China has done with eugenics, you will know what Rudolf Steiner was talking about. In terms of hygienics, in terms of hygiene and bringing spiritual hygiene through the central European countries, what we have there is really the gift of Rudolf Steiner. We have many of his medicaments, we have all of his work in medicine, and we are told in a principal lecture that I would recommend to everyone, called The Work of the Angel in Man's Astral Body by Rudolf Steiner. It's one lecture. And in there, he points out that in our times, medicine is a key factor. And if we do not get a hold of medicine, we will actually have a medicine that literally is proud to tell us that they're going to make us ill and be proud of it. He gives us very clear explanation of what I went into a great deal in the first set of lectures in New World Awakening with the book of Revelations, and that you need to wake up, because the sleepiness that's going on is not only not going to help you be part of the progressive spirits, but it is actually going to make you move backwards very quickly. And so unconsciousness is not an excuse at this point. And so I would like to, first off, read a couple things to tell you how Rudolf Steiner would define the word mechanical occultism. And then I'd also like to describe why it is that we must, if we wish to understand transhumanism. And by the way, transhumanism, what are we transitioning into? Ask yourself the question. Angels or animals? It's as simple as that. Rudolf Steiner asks that question in the work I quoted, made reference to, the work of the angel in man's astral body. He asks that we should ask that question. Not only should we awaken, but we should also find the divinity in every human that we see. And if we do, and if there is freedom of religion, then we can, in fact, get a hold of communicating with our own angel. But to communicate with an angel, you would have to believe that there were such beings. you'd have to believe that there is a physical world, there is a spiritual world, and that there is a threshold between them that can be crossed. So I'd first off like to give you a quote of Rudolf Steiner, taken from the Challenge of the Time, about mechanical occultism and the fact that it is America's task to handle mechanical occultism, or as he calls it, materialistic occultism or material occultism. And it is our task with this to not only create machines that are more centered on human subtle vibrations, but that those machines, he predicts, will be able to reach out into the cosmos with the power that is created. And there's a great debate, and you'll probably hear this with my dear friend Andrew Linnell and others who miss tech and the training program that they have, debating what the third force is, because Rudolf Steiner says there are three sub-nature forces: electricity, electromagnetism, and the third force. He doesn't describe the third force in great deal, and so there's tremendous amount of debate about that. But if we can cross this threshold, if we can get the aid of the spiritual world, then we can combat mechanical occultism. And one could ask the question here in America, are we losing the battle? And it certainly in some cases seems like we are. And you could also ask the question, then is it appropriate to become Luddites, to become people who stand against technology? In the old days, we were proud that we didn't watch television or go to movies if we were Waldorf teachers or taught in a Waldorf school as I did. But we must face these challenges. But to face the challenges, we must also understand we don't face them alone. We have the help of those who have gone before us. And this room I'm speaking in, literally, I could say 100 of my dearest, most cherished, beloved teachers have taught me in this room. And so it was one of the reasons that we decided to come back here and in a sense recognize them and their help, and that anything that I would ever say is simply standing on the shoulders of these great ones who have helped me as my teacher. So in the Challenge of the Time, Rudolf Steiner says mechanical occultism will not only provide the possibility of dispensing with 9/10 of the work presently done by human hands, it will also make possible to paralyze every uprising of the dissatisfied masses of humanity. That should explain a lot to you. Mechanical occultism is also the propaganda that we see on the news. It's the political uniparty. It's the nonsense of globalism. It's all of these things that are rolled into one to make sure that we are happy consumers on our cyber digital devices, going after one of the three big things that the internet is used for. As I'm sure you know, sex, violence, and sports. The top three things. Pornography so outreaches every speck of commerce that is on the internet that there aren't even words that can give you a good ratio of that, or a percentage, or a fraction. So mechanical occultism, that is our task. And what I noticed in Paul Emberson's books, which there was a beautiful review by my friend Stephen Usher on Paul Emberson's books. I'd like to say the name of them in case anyone who of our subscribers wants to get these books. They're very hard to find. But if you look in the Rudolf Steiner archives, you'll find that Stephen Usher did a review of these books, and he called it Two Books by Paul Emberson, From Jean de Chapur to Silicon Valley. That is the name of one of the volumes, and the other one is volume 2 of that. And there's a third book by Emberson called Machines and the Human Spirit, the Golden Age of the Fifth Kingdom. Now, those three books, very hard to get, but there's descriptions here at the Rudolf Steiner Archive in this review telling you how you can get those books. I had to look for them for quite a while, but when I'd found them, my friend Rick Knutson, who was there when the group in Seattle started working with this in a very real way when Paul was still alive, he is the one who told me about this. And so I looked and looked for quite a long time. Finally got the books, and when I read them, I said, oh my, I see why there's such controversy in what is called the Anthroposophical Society, or that would be the people who have joined a society supporting the work of Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner called his work anthroposophy. And so these anthroposophists really got worked up, I would say. And I talked with quite a few of them at length. A number of them I've had interviews on the phone. We've even done videos with some of them. And if you read Paul Emerson, what you're going to find is what you also find in another book by Nicanor Perlas and another book by Jeremy Nadler. Nadler's book is called In the Shadow of the Machine, The Prehistory of the Computer and the Evolution of Consciousness. Perlas's book is called Humanity's Last Stand, The Challenges of Artificial Intelligence. And I tell you those books because I want you to get them and read them. And when you do, you're going to be faced with many difficult questions. And you will have to ask yourself where you stand on this issue. Now, in a minute, I'm going to probably start talking a little bit about my personal history so you know where I have stood, which I've stood on both sides of this issue so far to each side that I can't even explain it to you, but I'll tell you a bit of my biography in a minute concerning that. But when I came across this and I read these books, I thought, oh, my. This is going to lead the anthroposophists into being Luddites. This is definitely going to lead the anthroposophist in avoid technology. Now, I may have this wrong, but that's pretty much what other people's take on these books are. Now, the books are brilliant. And throughout the books, exactly as I'm saying in the other books I just mentioned, there is a tremendous amount of cosmology. A tremendous amount of beautifully delivered cosmology. As a matter of fact, you sometimes have to wonder, except for the book on the history of computers, you have to wonder, what is this? Is this a book trying to describe all of Steiner's thought? Or is this a book on transhumanism or the question of transhumanism? And how do we face these beings that I'm going to describe to you in just a minute? And so what I noticed is that there became followers of Paul Emerson. And then there became those who weren't followers. And then there seemed to have been in the Anthroposophic Society a bit of a response to that. And so you see a number of other books that are also in the last few years, let's call it that, in the last 10 years, we've seen quite a few books come out on such things as Rudolf Steiner and the Atom by Keith Francis, or you see one of the very finest books in the ethers, which is done by Ernst Marty, and that is called The Etheric Broadening, Science Through Anthroposophy. He's written 2 books. Now, these books I'm giving you, which will also be in a bibliography, that you can then work on these things yourself, because you need to ask these questions. For instance, I'm going to now ask you if you yourself have this experience. Rudolf Steiner said, in The Crossing of the Threshold and the Social Organism, Spiritual Life, Economic Life, and Judicial Life in Berlin in 1919, he said the following. It's a few paragraphs, excuse me, while I read it, but I want to make sure that you have the exact right words. What the individual human being experiences consciously when he strives to attain clairvoyance in the spiritual world, namely the crossing of the threshold, must be experienced unconsciously by the whole of mankind. And please ignore that word, just make it humanity. During our 5th post-Atlantean epoch, humanity has no choice in regard to this. It must experience this unconsciously. Not the individual human being, but humanity. And the individual human being together with humanity also. What does this mean? What is now a joint activity of thought, feeling, and will within human beings will in the future take on a separate character, and this will come to the fore in various spheres. We are just passing through a time in which humanity is unconsciously crossing the threshold of a significant portal, a fact which is clearly evident to the clairvoyant power. Humanity passes through this crossing of the threshold in such a way that the spheres of thought, feeling, and will become separated. Mankind now faces 2 paths. One of these leads through the mechanization of the spirit. In more recent times, the spirit has become very mechanical, particularly in regard to the abstract laws of nature, which have also been applied to social life as ruling laws. Mechanization of the spirit, vegetalization of the soul. Just as the Americanization of the spirit represents a mechanization of spiritual life, so the Bolshevism, which tends to spread out in the East, represents an animalization of the human body. Now, there are many who've written on this topic. Bernard Leavigood is one of them. And he very clearly describes how humanity, as Steiner points out, is unconsciously being pulled across the threshold. Now we, as Steiner points out, if we are part of initiation, or if we're trying to wake up in our dreams, wake up in our sleep, and after we die or during initiation, we have the ability to cross that threshold. Now, humanity doesn't know that. They cross it at night, most of humanity. But those who are crossing it will notice something quite severe. They'll notice that their thinking, their feeling, and their willing, their soul forces, are split in three, and they go in three different directions. As a matter of fact, in some cases, Rudolf Steiner describes what I would characterize as thinking becomes neurosis, feeling becomes psychosis, and as he clearly points it out in the work of the Angel and Man's Astral Body, he says that the will, the abnegation, the aberration of the will, then becomes exaggerations of sex and violence. Neurosis, psychosis, and the exaggeration of sex and violence, I think that's probably the best description you're going to get of our modern age. And that is what happens to thinking, feeling, and willing as you cross the threshold. Now, if you happen to be spiritually developed and you cross the threshold, then you can keep those three together, and your I, your ego, can hold them together even while you're in the spiritual world. And if you have moral force, because you've done moral good deeds as you are in the spiritual world, then when you wake up in the morning, you might actually receive a message from the spiritual world, from your guardian angel, from your folk spirit of your nation called the archangel, or from the spirit of the times who we call the archangel Michael, who is really serving as the time spirit now, which is in the realm of the archai. So as humanity is being pulled across the threshold, if they are not conscious and if they're not developing themselves, neurosis, psychosis, and aberrations of the will, and sex and violence arise. But if you can cross the threshold and communicate with these beings, something else will happen. Over a long period of time, you can develop the three higher forces that are given by the angels, the archangels, and the archai. Rudolf Steiner, and strangely enough, even before Rudolf Steiner, Ralph Waldo Emerson, described them as imagination, inspiration, and intuition. As a matter of fact, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but the very being of materialism, before Rudolf Steiner ever used the name Ahriman, was used by Emerson profusely. He called it the being of a sclerotic death, the skeleton that was chasing him. He gives the same kind of descriptions of this being of Ahriman that Rudolf Steiner would, and he actually says that the development, or the natural development of the human intellect, as he calls it, there is literally a battle between Ahriman trying to stop that battle of the development of the human intellect, which is the same thing that Rudolf Steiner says. So as we are looking at crossing the threshold, if we can develop imagination, inspiration, intuition, or what you could call refined, higher thinking, feeling, and willing, then you have a chance to communicate with the beings who are very much interested in everything that we're doing as a human being. And they are very much there, ready to help us in every way that you can possibly imagine. I could begin to name those beings, but first, let's just name something that is the challenge of our time. And the challenge of our time is that we need to decide whether we're going into supernature or subnature. Just staying in nature, and what I did, the back to the land people, and I basically, went in and out of the Catholic Church and in and out of high tech. I was even involved in the National Security Agency. And so I was like waffling back and forth, back and forth. Do I really want to do my love, which is comparative religions, or do I want to be in the modern world and be a systems analyst, which is what I was, and try to figure out what machines are doing? But what happened was I kept bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball. But when we are talking about meeting the beings beyond the threshold, those beings are there in supernature, which we can talk about, angels, archangels, archai, and even higher beings, because in this quote I have from Ephesians 6:11, It also refers to the powers, principalities, the rulers of this world, and the spiritual wickedness. Well, they have very specific names. When you are talking about powers, you're talking about a being that is seldom ever spoken about by the people who are students of Rudolf Steiner's teachings. But Sorat is more or less the counterpoint to the being of Christ, who works through the Son. And so Sorat, this being who has yet to incarnate on the earth as a human being, is in fact the demon of the sun. And that is the being that is described in Revelation as rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And that's different than the dragon that wishes to consume the child born by the lady who has the moon beneath her feet and the sun behind her and the stars around her head. And really, the book of Revelation is a tremendous victory. It is triumph of the Spirit. You can't get a better story than that. But if we get caught up in the bowls of wrath, if we get caught up in the sounding of the trumpets, if we get caught up in the riders of death and all of these horrible things that we have to face, we then realize those are the very same beings that we face when we cross the threshold. So if you read the book of Revelation as if it is you either being initiated, dying, or like John being taken up into the 7th heaven as an initiation, if that is you and you see yourself as everything in that story is you, well, then it is a story of redemption. And it's the very story that we need to listen to. Now, this being of the sun, this demon of the sun, is trying to fight what it is that Christ is trying to do. And what is that? That is, give us a chance for our own I am, our own ego, our own personal development that goes between life to life. Sorat is trying to take that away from us, take away our ego, whereas Christ is trying to give that. The principalities, those are the archai. Well, they work through a group of beings who are very active right now, who are oftentimes ignored. The name comes from ancient Vedic wisdom, and it's clearly described long before Rudolf Steiner, that the beings called the asuras attack your willpower. They actually are very thrilled to steal everything that you do. They would like to turn your life into an automaton, into a robotic life. And then you hear in this quote about the rulers of this world, the archangels. Well, that is the being that we're talking about called Ahriman. That comes from ancient Persia, from a being called Angrimanu, who is the being of darkness of the earth, who fights against the being of light from the sun, whose name is Ahura Mazda. Now, there are other versions of these names, but I'm giving you the quick version. And then spiritual wickedness, that's the angels. The angels working in you. And as Rudolf Steiner says, the angels are working in your astral body. So then it's very easy to understand, and in other places Rudolf Steiner describes, that the archangels are working in your etheric body and that the archai are working in your willpower. Now, these other beings wish to come in and steal that, as I've mentioned. Your thinking, feeling, and willing. The anti-angels, anti-archai, the archangels and the anti-archai, they would like to steal your thinking, feeling, and willing, and they'd like to do it unconsciously so that you don't even know it. So it's going on, and you have no idea it's even going on. That's their plan. That's the plan of Sorat. That's the reason hardly anyone ever speaks of Sorat. And people don't speak about the asuras much because they enter into the most mysterious aspect of the human being, the willpower. And there is so much that is unknown, and the mysteries of birth and death are really the mysteries of willpower. And so it is the work of these beings that is trying to pull us into subnature. Now, what is subnature? Subnature, according to Rudolf Steiner, has 3 aspects. I mentioned them before. He says that if you go one step down, you're going into the realm of electricity. 2 steps down and you're going into the realm of electromagnetism, and 3 steps down you're going into the 3rd force. Now, some will call that atomic fractioning, and they'll call it all kinds of different names. But the reality is that electricity, electromagnetism, and the atomic forces, Rudolf Steiner calls it, or the third force, are really working with ethers. Now, the ethers are very difficult to explain because we get the wrong impression when I say the word warmth, when I say the word light, or sound, or chemistry, the valence between atoms and between chemical substances, or life. And you might get kind of upset because when you say supernature, it's invisible. But here's the sad reality. When you say subnature, it's invisible too. It's in a dark realm that is so powerful that it is actually storing up the stolen willpower of human beings in this realm called the eighth sphere, but you could just call it another moon of the earth. But it's storing up what is stolen from human beings. And so electricity, and I want to make this kind of clear because it's a little bit confused with many people who are looking at this. You could call electricity static electricity because it's everywhere. And every single atom has exchanges of ions and chemicals have exchanges and so on and so forth. So all this static electricity has filled the whole universe. But when you bring it down to the earth and you make it electromagnetic energy, then that is the sound ether. And you're dealing then with mass-inducing binding force. It is the force that holds it all together down here. Rudolf Steiner would actually say, and has said, that the atom is congealed electricity. Now, by that, he doesn't mean electromagnetism, he means electricity, and he makes the distinction. But electricity, in its nature, densifies and condenses into darkness. And then you add electromagnetism, you add magnetism to it, and you not only steal the light from the angels, but you steal the sound from the archangels, and you put it into wires, and you imprison these angelic forces. And in fact, human beings whose will are being stolen by these devices that they're using, which I'll describe in a minute, their willpower is caught up in our own electromagnetic force. And it is so powerful that it is frightening. And as a matter of fact, hardly anyone will tell you more frightening things about the future than Rudolf Steiner. And he tells us, basically, that we should get used to machines because machines not only going to be here till the end of time, but we need to create new machines. And we're going to talk about that. He calls them, basically, they're resonance devices. They're vibratory resonance devices, sympathetic resonance, the same devices that John Worrell Keeley invented. But when we were talking about what's going to happen in the future, unfortunately, Rudolf Steiner says things like, the forging together of human nature and that of machines will be a great significant problem for the remainder of Earth existence. And then he also warns us that these machines are run by Ahriman. And Ahriman, another name, is materialism. And materialism, Rudolf Steiner said, really became a philosophy and became very formed in the 1700s in Britain. And this materialism is basically teaching one thing, humanism, or what is called in America secular humanism, which it used to be that if you didn't put down your religious preference, they said you were a secular humanist. In other words, you believe in the human being and you believe in science. That's not a religion. But what it really did is the opposite. Humanism made sure that the human being was taken out of the equation altogether. And it was literally made church law in the 9th century when they said this human being is made up of soul with a tiny bit of spirit, and they barely gave any credence to that. But of course, Rudolf Steiner says that we are threefold beings in many ways. And the one that I want to talk about today is that we are a being who has their I am, their ego, in their heart. And this is critical to understand because above that is where you ascend. This is where you will find supernature in your own body. And below that, you will find subnature. Rudolf Steiner characterizes it by saying, and in the book of Revelation, it calls the Lion of Judah, the lamb that has been wounded, the only being who can face off these demons, the dragon, the demon, and the beast that rises up out of the sea, is this Lion of Judah, this slain lamb. And what does it say the slain lamb has? 7 eyes, or 7 wounds that have become 7 eyes that have become 7 horns. That's the astral, etheric, and physical body. And so the Lion of Judah, of course, is Christ, according to the book of Revelation. And what is happening here is that the opening of these chakras, these 7 places which Rudolf Steiner, in modern science, they would be called nerve plexus, major nerve plexus in these places where we have these supposed lotus flowers or chakras, where they have petals that spin that are related to your moral development. Well, Rudolf Steiner says that below the heart, you were supposed to have worked on that in the past. That's the past. And above the heart's the future. And in fact, you can find subnature below the heart. For the people who want to turn to their cell phone and not to other people, they're actually damaging the chakra just below the heart. For the people who want to use their cell phone as a way to believe that they're intelligent, and also to contact everyone that you know, and also to run your Internet of Things, to run your life, to be the machines that provide basically a slave labor force for you that in many cases we are not thankful for, we are not grateful for, and we do not understand. But when we are using those forces, they are literally the sub-forces, the lower chakras. But when we're using the higher chakras, that is what Rudolf Steiner calls imagination, inspiration, and intuition. In other words, going into the realm of our future when we will become angels, archangels, and archai. And that is what I believe humans are transitioning into. So a transhuman is not transitioning into a divineless human that has no reference to life before death or life after death. That's what secular humanism is trying to teach us. That's what transhumanism is trying to teach us, but even worse. So humanism takes the divine out of the equation completely. It also keeps you asleep, and it also takes away your freedom. Now, how does it do this? Well, Rudolf Steiner said that at a certain point, and he speaks of our age, that the earth would become completely surrounded by electromagnetic forces that are in fact a spider web. And on this spider web, he describes, gray human thought would exist. Not human thought, but gray human cold thought. And so when we look to the internet, we see that people are cold. We see that they argue with people on Facebook. We see that they feel free to say whatever they want. We see that their mind has become numb because they no longer go to a book to look things up. They no longer read. They simply do a Google search and then believe that whatever they see is the truth. In other words, wisdom has been transplanted by what looks to be omniscience. Because any student in your class, you can say something as a professor, they can get out their phone and say, no, you're incorrect. Last month that was all changed, and everything you know about that is now false. Happens all the time. So what is it that that phone does? It makes you think you're omniscient. Well, that, of course, is completely ridiculous. What the phone really is something that hardly anyone thinks about. First off, it is millions and millions of hours of human beings using human intelligence to create software and machinery that is advanced to the point that this little device is as powerful as the computers that I worked on when I was in the National Security Agency in 1972. This is much more powerful than the largest computer in the world at that time. And it has more capacities with the apps that are on it. And people are sick because of this. So when I say this, I'm talking about smartphones, iPads, computers, anything digital, the Internet of Things, anything digital. And I'm also going to have to include that materialism was really founded by Ahriman when printing came into existence. Because in the old days, when you read something, you had to read it out loud. And if anybody heard something incorrect, they would correct you. You weren't allowed to have private thoughts, and you weren't allowed to read to yourself. The Hammurabi Code was written on stone, and you'd have to read it out loud. If you read it to yourself, the offense was death. You were not allowed to read to yourself. So printing, because most of the internet is based upon words, it takes words and uses them in a way that we have only seen, for instance, with Goethe. Goethe wrote The Sorrows of Young Werther. And what happened? It was one of the first novels ever written in Europe. Dozens of people jumped out the window afterwards and killed themselves. Words, novels, telling biographies, telling things that are close to the human being can be so powerful that you cannot actually put a measure upon that. So we have to include printing. And when we are looking at that phone and we're reading, it has more on it than all the libraries in the world. It has practically any book you want, you can find, unless it's an anthroposophic book, for free online, okay? The Library of Congress is nothing compared to what I carry in my pocket. I'm omniscient. What is that? That's the pride of Lucifer. It's the fall of Lucifer. And when we're talking about electromagnetism, that's the fall of angels into electromagnetic devices. So right here we have the cold light of Lucifer fallen into matter to try to capture human thinking with the prideful thought, the hubris to think that the human being deserves this, or that the human being deserves being able to look up all knowledge and have it in the palm of their hand. They don't. No one does. And to get to that, there's not a human on the face of the earth that can understand the software and the mechanical works of this smartphone. No human. There's no human who understands the programming. And let me give you an example. When microchips were created, I don't know if you understand the process, but integrated circuits and microchips were created out of amorphous silicon. Silicon is what gives everything in nature the ability to have levity, to rise up. We only stand because of silica, and then later replaced by calcium in our body. And so silica and other substances with metals were laid into patterns. Now these patterns were bigger than a school gymnasium, bigger than the largest hangar in the airport. That's how big the original microchip is. And there's many layers. And the more that they put in the computer, the more layers there are. Layer after layer after layer after layer. Each one of them has to have a picture taken of it. And then the patterns, which are the old patterns that when I was in the NSA, we used to have to use wires. We'd have to hook up this register to that register. And if it added up and it came up with another number, then I would have to say, and I go from this with that total to here. And I had to plug it in, right? Well, no more. That is on the chip. And on that chip are more connections and more patterns than any human can comprehend with their mind. So here we are using a smartphone. We don't deserve it. We're prideful. We live by it. We let it control our thinking. And we think we're so smart that we can look up anything on the internet. I don't even need to remember anything anymore. I can just simply look it up. And I can look it up very quickly. And it's a free service, by the way. Isn't that marvelous? That is Lucifer. And what does Lucifer wish to do? Lucifer wishes to make you prideful, have cold light, non-effulgent, cold light, which draws you down into the darkness of the earth and keeps you away from being a human being that knows that they're divine, and keeps you away from the mission of America, which is cosmology, but not any cosmology. Rudolf Steiner says the antidote to mechanical cultism is cosmology or cosmogony. You can find this in the book, Cosmogony, Freedom, and Altruism. Few people speak about this. I don't think I've seen a book that spoke about this. But that's the solution. When you can understand, he says, the cosmic understanding of Christ, then you can place yourself properly in relationship to being challenged by Lucifer, to use your smart device as an excuse for your own mental development. Well, that's Lucifer in your astral body. And as you know, the astral body is filled with pictures. Well, that's what a phone is. That's what your computer is. It's filled with pictures, isn't it? Well, what does Ahriman wish to do? Ahriman works in your etheric body. And Ahriman, this being Angry Manu, actually tries to take every ritualistic, beautiful aspect out of your life and turn it into nothing but a robotic, automatic, automaton's response. To turn your heart into absolute coldness in your etheric body. Now, I haven't said this, but I need to say it. Rudolf Steiner said that the greatest moment in human development was the mystery of Golgotha, the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, who became the Christ. He said that the second greatest event in human evolution was happening now, in the etheric realm. And it's a re-crucifixion of Christ in the etheric realm. Now that's a terrible thing, and I'm going to describe that now, but you can also look through the astral body into the etheric realm and see Christ there. He calls it the etheric second coming of Christ, or the second coming of Christ. He says that it will become ever more prevalent from 1933 that people will have this experience, and it will be what he calls, in some cases, the Damascus experience of Paul. They will meet Christ in the etheric realm. And that etheric realm is around the earth, and it gives life to the earth, and it gives life to your body. So you have an invisible astral body. You have an invisible etheric body. And that etheric body builds up and brings life to your physical body. Well, Ahriman wants to take that life away. And life comes through rhythmic upbuilding processes in the human being, and Ahriman wishes to drag them down. So what does Ahriman do? Ahriman makes sure that in entering electromagnetism, that through social media, we believe, many believe, that we can contact all of our friends through social media. We just have to send out a little message. I can contact literally 50,000 people tonight with one message at 1 second. And if I'm foolish, I will believe those are all my friends and they matter. I will believe that is my public. I will believe that I'm really making human contact, but you are not. If you don't know those people, and it's a tremendous convenience, isn't it, if you know them. But if you don't know them, you never really met them. You don't know them as a human being. And if they came into your life, you may have a completely opposite opinion. But it satisfies the Ahrimanic desire in your heart to be social. And so you see these pictures everywhere. And you can see it anywhere in your life. Walk in to a room full of young people. Not a one of them is speaking to each other. They are all on their phones. And in some cases, you'll see two laugh at the same time. That's because they're speaking to each other through Snapchat in the same room, but they don't speak to each other. And this leads to all kinds of illnesses in the social realm. And as I quoted before, Rudolf Steiner said, well, I didn't quote this, and I should, but Rudolf Steiner said that if we focus on the human heart as a pump, and we make sure that no longer we believe that the human heart is a pump, also that the brain is a computer, or that your nerves are wires, these mechanical thoughts transplant human thought. And who are those mechanical thoughts coming from? Lucifer in your astral body, Ahriman in your etheric body, and in your will, because your will is eaten up. When you work on that phone, your warmth is eaten by the phone. That phone is a black box. It can suck your thinking, feeling, and willing into non-space. Because the Lucifer, Ahriman, and the Asuras, they don't really exist here. They exist through us, and only when they steal things from us. So they want to steal our thinking, feeling, and willing so they can be here. But they live in the realm of subnature. They live in this realm. Can you enter this realm? Not without being shocked. You cannot. And matter of fact, I didn't finish the thought that warmth, light, electricity, electrostatic energy, water, life, chemistry, they're all invisible. So when we're told, oh, that's nonsense, believing in the invisible, believing that there's these beings and so on and so forth, we can't see them. Well, you can't see this either. You can't see the sub-nature realm. You can't enter into it. You can't even comprehend it. There is no human alive that can comprehend it. That's why it's beyond us. That's why Lucifer works in the realm of the astral body with the angels, but he's working in a different time sequence, we could call it. Rudolf Steiner said, there's no such thing as evil. Evil is there for a time period, and evil is there to test good. And if you don't test good, it is not good, and it does not become stronger. So when we're talking about these evil beings, yes, they have evil intent, because the intent is the battle in you, in your thinking, feeling, and willing. It's also in your bloodstream. It's the battle for your ego. It's the battle to say, enter into the sub-nature realm and have that pride of Lucifer, that my phone, I know everything, that I have the cold, incorrect belief about human dignity and about how humans communicate through Ahriman. And I say, oh, I'm so proud. I got 500,000 hits on that last video. I'm a good person. That has nothing to do with that. And then, when we enter into the will, they will steal your will by what? We now know that Facebook, Google was all created as a cyber drug. We know that because the cathode ray tube of television, I worked in the NSA to calibrate it so that you wouldn't go into a seizure when you watch television. If the refresh frequency is other than 60, if it even goes to 70, you can go into a seizure. If you flash the certain color lights from a television, you can do more harm than you can imagine, but you can certainly send someone into a seizure. This is well known. And there were actually video games had to be taken off the market because they capitalized on this. If you stand outside of a room in the old days, when you had a cathode ray tube, and people were watching television, I used to do this. I'd walk in, I'd wait for the commercial, I'd clap my hands 3 times, and I'd say, I'll give $100 to anyone who can tell me what you're watching on television. I never had to pay out that $100 bill. You are hypnotized. So, when we're talking about the battle of mechanical occultism, we need cosmology. We need, in America, to take that next step. And that's why I think some of these writers, in fact, did put in their book quite a bit of cosmology to try to teach people the bigger perspective. Because if you can understand that this is a battle, if you can understand that you are in the middle of this battle, whether you like it or not, if you can understand the beings and you can call them out exactly for what they are, then you can say to Lucifer, oh, that's a very nice thing you do, and I'm going to use that wisely, but I'm going to use it carefully, and I am not going to let you steal my willpower. I'm not going to let you convince me that machines will become super artificial intelligences that should take over the world. First off, I don't have time to describe it to you, but that is nonsense. At this moment, there's only one artificial intelligence on the face of the earth, and that is bought up by Eric Schmidt's mother company of Google, which is Alphabet. They bought it from DeepMind in England, and there's now 2 of them, DeepMind 1, DeepMind 2. Those are the only 2 artificial intelligent machines in the world. Period. All the rest is nonsense. When they say artificial intelligence, they're talking about subroutines upon subroutines upon subroutines. And they have so many fallacies. They do calculate. They do, according to Steiner, have a machine intelligence. But they do not have warmth. They do not have human thought, and they never will. And a computer will never do what the brain does. No machine will ever do what the heart does. Nothing will ever replicate the blood circulation. These things are sacrosanct, and we need to bring this back and look at the human being. And when we look at the human being and put the human being first, then we find out that Lucifer, Ahriman, and the Asuras have no power over us if we understand their nature, if we understand how they work, and if we understand what we can do to make sure that we can antidote these things. And you can antidote them. And something I'm going to share with you is a terrible shock. But it's something that I do need to share. There are new kingdoms of nature being created. That is true. I should probably say that first. Rudolf Steiner said that in between the mineral and the plant, a new kingdom would be created. With the plant, nature of movement and life would come to the mineral, and that we'd have literally a new kingdom of nature. And this kingdom of nature would exist between the mineral and the plant, and that there would be characteristics of both. And it's human, it's man-made, but it's made with the inspiration of these beings I described. And then there'll be another kingdom, and this is seldom ever talked about. There'll be a kingdom in between the plant and the animal. And we already see that. The kingdom that I described first is the kingdom of electromagnetism and computers. The second kingdom is the kingdom where all of a sudden these cyber virtual realities start to move. Because that's what happens when you crossbreed a plant and an animal. It gets a bit of astralness to it, and it starts to move. Well, we already have the Atlas Warrior, bulletproof. It's already been deployed. It's already being used. And it travels with a horse, which can pick up a human being and carry them out the battlefield, supposedly. It can also run through a brick wall. You can shoot bullets at them. Nothing can stop the Atlas Warrior. And it also travels with a dog. And this dog is more powerful than any human being, can leap, it can do amazing things. So we already have that kingdom of robots. And that exists between the realm of the plant and the animal. The problem is the following, and Rudolf Steiner discusses this in a number of places. He says the problem is that there will also be another kingdom between the animal and the human. And that kingdom will be what we know as clones, cyborgs, transhumans, enhanced human beings, wetworks, neural networks put in people, implants. Just today, I forget, one of the major companies said they're going to put a strap on your hand and wirelessly you can talk to your computer and you can do searches on the internet and you will no longer have to use a keyboard. These inventions are happening, good and ill, every day. My friend Rick told me about nanobox. A nanobox is the new battery. It will make all other things obsolete. There are new forms of energy that literally you can run an engine for a month off of a glass of water. These things are already made. So when we're talking about technology, we have to remember that the third force is not atomic destruction. Rudolf Steiner said that once you received and understood what John Worrell Keeley did with vibrations in his machines through sympathetic resonance, that we would be able to use the morality in our own etheric body, in other words, defeat Ahriman, and make machines that respond to our subtlest etheric vibrations, and that those machines would, in fact, replace all other machines. And this is the good news that I have to tell you, that Rudolf Steiner point blank said that all of these things will pass. Now, that's good news for us Luddite people who would like to see all the technology go anyway. But that's not the solution. The solution is we have to go to the new machines. So we have to have inventors who use their laboratory as an altar of the spirit, Rudolf Steiner says, who develops the new machines that then lead us into a new age, a new morality. And this is shocking. And there's only one passage I know that can help us understand this. And then I'll read another passage, which I'm sure will scare us all. Matter of fact, every single time I read this passage to an anthroposophist, they tell me, I need to see the page you got that from, and I need to read that book. And then they read it 2 and 3 and 4 times, and they say, I don't believe this. I've read this before. I believed he was speaking metaphorically. It is obvious he is not speaking metaphorically at all, that he is speaking of the pure reality of the way that we evolve through quantum leaps. Now, these quantum leaps have happened in the past. And these quantum leaps are scary. We call them Noah's Ark. We call it Manu and the Holy Rishis. We call it all kinds of things. But the answer is the following, according to Rudolf Steiner. And I was so happy that I found this recently in the Schiller Files, another book I have in the bibliography. Rudolf Steiner says, from GA 173, in the comparatively near future, this much admired modern technology will reach a final stage where it will, in a certain way, make itself obsolete. On the other hand, something will arise which will lead to man's acquiring the possibility of using the delicate vibrations, the delicate oscillations in his etheric body to set machines in operation. There it is. How many of us kind of hoped that somebody else would do something and make this problem go away? Well, here's the deal. It's amazing to realize that people don't understand that everything is related to the sun. If there was a few coronal mass ejections, every satellite, every smart device on the earth, if they happened at 2 different times of the day, 2 different ones for the night and the day. So 2 coronal mass ejections could wipe out every single electronic device, every speck of memory, every bit of it. Rudolf Steiner says this shocking thing, and the reason I bring this up is because this is in Paul Emerson's book. And as I said, there are things in his book which are definitely a cosmology, and where you can just feel him wishing that he could share with you his understanding of this cosmology because he believes it's the antidote. Well, here's something else that will shock you. And that is taken from Rudolf Steiner's set of lectures in 1911 and 12. They put together in a book called Earthly and Cosmic Man. And in it he says the following: Kali Yuga broke upon the world, reaching its close in our own age. Now that the ascent of the spiritual world must begin, a spiritual science has come to mankind. Kali Yuga began 3,101 years before our era and ended in the year 1899 AD. That is why 1899 is a year of such importance. The reascent to the spiritual world, this must be the ideal of the future. The age preceding the onset of Kali Yuga was, however, an age characteristic of the ancient Persian epoch, when the old remembrances rose up within man via the astral body. Now, he was to turn to the world outside. This was a great and epic-making transition. In the case of many human beings, it came about in such a way that for a time all vision departed from them and darkness spread over their souls. This condition of darkness did not last for long periods, actually only for weeks. But men passed into this condition of sleep, and many never came out of it. Many of them perished, and only relatively few were left in widely scattered regions. There is not enough time today to describe the conditions actually prevailing at that time. It can only be said briefly that owing to so large a number of human beings having succumbed, conditions were dark and sinister in the extreme. In the only a few scattered places did men awaken from the great spiritual deluge that spread over their souls like a sleep. This condition of sleep was felt by most souls as a kind of drowning, and by only a few as a reawakening. And then came the Black Age, the age devoid of God. This drowning is the feeling you get when you look around and you see that we're in an apocalyptic age, when you know that you are having an unveiling of the soul of revelation. So each of us, as we face the evil that is there consciously, because it's usually unconscious, and we look at the evil in our thinking, feeling, and willing, and we make sure that we understand in our hearts that Lucifer, Ahriman, and the Asuras, even Soroth himself, has no control over a heart that is dedicated to Christ. And when we make sure that we do our job to counteract mechanical occultism with cosmology that reaches out into the cosmos, as Rudolf Steiner tells us we need to do. A cosmology is no good if it doesn't include the cosmic Christ, he says. If we can do that, if we can understand that we are in a battle, if we can understand that the human being is the central hieroglyph of the universe as it is, then we can know that these beings will have no authority over us, and we can know that in time, omniscience, omnipresence and omnipotence will come to us with the aid of those beings who stand on the other side of the threshold, ready to help us at any minute.